Today on Inside Utah Politics, the Utah Republican Party has a new chair. Robert Axson is here to discuss why he made a run for the job and his vision for the party over the next 2 years. Plus, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security grilled by a Senate committee, what he's saying about border security, and why Republicans say he's out of touch.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Robert Axson. He is the new chair for the Utah Republican Party. Robert, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Good to be with you. I always enjoy talking with you, Glenn.
Well, I appreciate that. Let's get right into it. When you announced you were making a run, I sent you a text and I asked if you're crazy, and I was only halfway kidding. This is a job that takes a lot of effort. It's a volunteer. You don't get paid for it. It'll take a lot of your time. Why were you interested?
I'm glad you brought up the word volunteer. One of the things that Utah does best, we're always at the forefront or even at the top of the list of states that are most volunteer-oriented. We volunteer the most hours, we engage the most on building community, and I think political participation within a political party is one meaningful way that we can build community and do that type of volunteer work. And so it is going to be an interesting couple of years. There's a lot that we're facing as a country and as a state. There's a lot that we need to engage in, even within partisan politics and with the party. It's not always going to be easy, but I think there's too much that we have to solve for Utah.
We will get into some of those priorities and your vision in a bit, but I want to talk a little bit more about this situation. The last 3 chairs before you have been one and done. That kind of hits to my point where this can be a thankless job. Do you see that as a sign of the times of what's happening, or what is it that has chairs, the last few of them, signing up for one term and saying, I've had enough? Yeah,
the last handful of years politically, even nationwide, but certainly here in Utah, have been very challenging. There's a lot of course, division that we're seeing as a country and within the party process. Ultimately, though, I think that we can solve enough questions for Utahns, not just Republicans, but general run-of-the-mill Utahns, that they'll see the Republican Party is serious about improving our opportunities and improving our way of life for Utah. That's a place where ultimately, whether I serve a second term or not, will be inconsequential, because we'll build a party that is strong enough that whoever takes over when I do leave, whatever additional party leaders, party advocates, and volunteers will be working towards horizon-level visions and horizon goals. It can't just be about winning elections next year. We have to be fighting for Utah 5 and 10 years down the road.
I'm glad you brought up that point about the division we've seen as a country, but also within the Republican Party. When you take a look at where the Republican Party is heading and how it differs from maybe when we were younger, what do you do? What steps do you take to try to make it more attractive to the bigger group of Republicans who some believe the party is starting to move away from them?
I think a big word, and it's one word, but it's a big idea, and the word is consistency. I think the Republican Party has to be consistent in not only talking about what it believes and educating people about what it believes, but we have to be consistent in showing up. If we never show up in a person's life, in their neighborhood, in their community, and yet we expect them to vote for our candidates, shame on us. And so our consistency of being there hand in hand, trying to fight for the future that they want for their kids and grandkids, that's where we'll be able to solve a lot of the challenges. And I think that's where we'll be able to get to what we both experienced growing up under a Reagan and early Republicans. It's this aspirational idea that there's a lot that we have to be proud of as Americans and what we can fight for. I think we can get back to that spirit. And will we still have different points of view within the party? Of course we will. But at that point, I think we'll be working towards that common vision, and the peripheral disagreements, while still pertinent, will not be the sole focus.
Talk about your background. This isn't your first run as an executive within the Utah GOP. Also, you've spent a lot of time working for Senator Mike Lee.
Yep, absolutely. So a few years ago, I was the state party vice chair when Derek Brown was the party chairman. During that period, we started off, we were $500,000 in debt. We certainly had a mountain to climb as it pertains to fundraising. We were able to retire that debt. Now I'm looking forward to what we can build. And so that experience I had of retiring the debt, I think prepares us now for what we do moving forward. And like you said, I spent quite a bit of time professionally working for Senator Lee. I was his state director for 7 years, had worked in D.C. prior to that. I know what it means to navigate the political waters. I also, more importantly, know what it means to continue to fight for Utah and all 29 counties.
Let's talk more about the top priorities that'll be coming over the next 2 years. A big election year coming up next year. What will you be working toward?
I think we have to build the party's structure so that it can be seen as being strong. Right now, if you ask a Utahn or anybody, is the Republican Party strong in Utah? I think there's 3 ways you can answer it. If you're talking about the brand, absolutely, the brand is strong. I don't think there's any Republican candidate for office or any elected official in Utah who was elected as a Republican who would want to see that R or that elephant disappear from their name. That brand is strong. There's a value to it. If you asked about the people of Utah, the people who consider themselves Republicans, the party is strong. But if you asked about the structure and the strategy and the data and the influence of the apparatus that is the Utah Republican Party, we've got work to do. And so that has to be the focus these next 2 years, is to make sure that when you ask yourself, is the Utah Republican Party strong? You can also answer about the party itself and say, yes, it's strong. Once you do that, then you can navigate the complex elections like the 2024 presidential election. We'll have certainly some compelling races here in Utah. You can navigate those while also engaging into new communities, younger generations, and whatnot.
I understand as your position, you can't get into a situation where you're talking about candidates specifically or endorsing candidates, but I do want to dig a little more into the 2024 election, because one of those issues that we talk about with the Republican Party being divided, a lot of that was centered around our former president, who is running once again. We've seen a lot of Republicans, elected officials and otherwise in the state of Utah, get behind other candidates and say, look, he had his chance, it's time to move on. His former director here in the state of Utah running his campaign has even said it's time to move on. Any thoughts when it comes to the presidential race that you can share?
Yeah, I think the critical thing, getting back to what I mentioned before of looking to the horizon, we need to be thinking about what we want the Utah Republican Party to be doing 5 years and 10 years and 20 years from now. If you're focused on those, you'll win elections along the way and you'll support candidates along the way. If, however, you become too myopically focused just on next year, we'll lose our way. And ultimately, as it pertains to Donald Trump and any of the other candidates for president, I'm looking forward as a Utahn to hearing what they prepare and plan on doing if they are to be victorious. If they're our next president, what will they do to fight for the conservative principles that have served Utah well? I think Donald Trump certainly can make that case, but so too can the rest of them. The big thing that we'll need to do as a party is to make sure that there is a fair and transparent process where Utahns have the opportunity to vet them through their nomination.
The SB 54, the signature path to the primary, has been a big controversial issue within the Republican Party, and it still is today. What will your approach be? We've seen a lot of effort, or some effort, I should say, to kind of chip away at that. How will you approach that?
I think it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I believe our caucus system is a wonderful process. It's one that has a door open to anybody who has an interest. It doesn't matter if you're from a well-connected family or if you have name ID or money, you can come and get involved through the caucus system. I think that's a beautiful process. I absolutely support it. As it pertains to what systems of laws the state legislature has given to us, I think we need to figure out ways to meaningfully move forward collaboratively. So it can't just be the stick over the head of the legislature to try to influence changes that we want to see as a party. We also need to have that carrot of encouragement. Here's what we can do as a strong party to kind of work around the edges and fix that process.
So do you still see a path for the signatures when it comes to,
as of right now, that's state law.
nomination?
That's state law. And so as Republicans, we need to abide by state law, even if at the same time we're working to adjust that. But I think we can do that in collaborative ways and in encouraging ways that are built around what we agree upon. We don't have to only focus on those points of disagreement. Sometimes I think a challenge that folks have is if you don't have those moments of where you've worked together, it becomes a lot more difficult to get past where you disagree. Let's figure out those places where we agree, spend a lot of time there, and then on those disagreement points, we can approach it more productively.
So over the next couple of years, can you mend the party, so to speak, when it comes to that issue?
It gets back to that word of consistency. I think if we consistently show up and show the value of what our principles and platform provide, show the value of the service that Republicans are providing in all 29 counties, not only to candidates and grassroots activists and donors, but to elected officials as well, that's where you start to mend any divide that we have within the party. So you have to consistently show up.
All right. You have a big job ahead of you over the next couple of years. Appreciate your time here talking to us about your vision and what you would like to see happen. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Glenn. Good to be with you.
You bet. Coming up, a new office in our state focusing on strengthening families. The director is here to discuss the need and the top goals for family-friendly policies. But first, an effort to prohibit members of Congress from owning and trading stocks. Why some say it's a matter of ethics after the break. DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas in the hot seat earlier this week as senators on the Homeland Security Committee question him on the administration's border security plan. Mayorkas says the U.S. has control of the southern border, but as Washington correspondent Anna Warnicki reports, Republicans remain skeptical.
Tuesday, Republican senators on the Homeland Security Committee grilled DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas on the status of the southern border.
In terms of the security of America's southern border, is it an A or an F? Where do you grade it?
Senator,
I'm looking for a letter.
Senator, it's not so straightforward.
Well, sure it is. It's clearly an F.
Mayorkas defended the Biden administration's border security plans, but Republicans, including Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, weren't buying it.
Our Center for Combating Human Trafficking presents one of our greatest priorities within the Department of Homeland Security.
You are failing miserably.
Mayorkas told the committee that President Biden's proposed budget includes critical resources needed to prevent illegal border crossings,
including 350 additional Border Patrol agents and 310 additional Border Patrol processing coordinators to get more agents back into the field.
But Texas Republican Tony Gonzalez says that's not enough. He wants Congress to pass a border bill before Title 42 expires next month.
This crisis ends when President Biden signs a bill into law that strengthens border security and protects legal immigration.
In Washington, I'm Anna Warnicki.
Also on Capitol Hill, some lawmakers want to prohibit members of Congress from owning stocks because they say it creates conflicts of interest and ethical problems. Washington correspondent Alexandra Limon reports.
Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley says stock trading by members of Congress is wrong and should be banned.
It's corrupt because members use advantageous access to information unavailable to the general public, to win stock market returns that beat the market year after year.
Moves by some lawmakers to sell off stock just before the pandemic lockdowns created concerns. And Senator Sherrod Brown says there are more recent examples of potentially problematic trading.
The Silicon Valley Bank was closed. Even during that period, there were reports that members of Congress were trading bank stocks. I mean, imagine that.
Supporters of the ban say there's just too much temptation for members of Congress, and they say owning stocks can also create other conflicts of interest.
Members' portfolios have the potential to influence how they write legislation and how they vote on bills.
The proposed ban has bipartisan support.
And unfortunately, it happens way too often in this town, is you have a member of Congress who gets a special piece of information, maybe a classified piece of intelligence, and then they trade stocks, getting rich off the public trust.
If passed, it would force lawmakers, their spouses, and dependents to stop trading and move their money to other investments like blind trusts by the end of their current term. Previous efforts to pass such a law failed. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Coming up, a state office focusing on families. The director is here to discuss the need and the top priorities after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
We turn now to a new office at the state level focused on creating family-friendly policies. Amy Winder-Newton is the director, here to get us up to date on the work they are doing. Amy, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I say new, I guess I should probably say fairly new, because this started all in September of last year. But it's a concept that had kind of been developing in the governor's mind. Talk about briefly a summary on what the Office of Families is.
Well, the governor knows how important it is for us to have strong families. It's the least expensive way for government to, or it's way less expensive than what government costs to fix problems later. And so the whole purpose of this is to strengthen families proactively in an upstream manner and be involved in looking at ways that we can cut issues that are causing problems for families, but also to be able to look at ways that we can proactively strengthen them. We don't want to spend all this money later to fix problems that come when kids come from unstable homes. And so that's really the purpose, is to have that focus.
So this was an appointed position. The governor comes to you, says, are you interested? You agreed to do it. Why were you interested in a position like this?
Well, I'm kind of a policy nerd. And so anytime I can look at ways that we can better people's lives through better policy and government, I'm excited. I think it's great. And I love families. I believe in the effort. I think Governor Cox has a great vision. And this is something that I really believe in. So I was excited to get to work.
And you've also raised children. So you know what it's like to go through that process. How much of a role does that play as you're working in this position?
I mean, I think it's always great to have our own personal perspectives on things that happen to us and our families, but my family's very different than a lot of the families in Utah. I mean, when we talk about things that we can do to help our families, a lot of the things that are costing taxpayers a lot of money later in social services are things that we can prevent by helping to strengthen vulnerable families in particular. And so one of the things that we pitched to the legislature and that they agreed to help fund was a home visiting program for our most vulnerable families. These would be families on WIC or Medicaid, moms who have new babies. We want to help give them the support in their home. And so there's different programs that are operating where you can have a nurse or another person come and give them support, help them figure out developmentally if their child is in line with where they should be, check on the mother's mental health. And so this is something that we think is really important. I mean, we know a baby's brain is 80% developed by the time they're 3. And the more we can prevent trauma or other things in their young life, the better off that they'll be in the long run.
That's one part of a 5-part focus that your office has. Before we get into the other parts, so I want to talk a little bit more about what you just mentioned, and that is working with the legislature. What is your role, and how do you go about helping push for these family-friendly policies in the state of Utah?
Well, of course, the governor and I meet. We talk about our priorities and which direction we want to go. And then if there's a funding request or if there's legislation that's needed, we work to find good legislators that can help us and get them on board with this. And luckily, I feel like we have a lot of legislators that are very pro-family. And so it's been great to have the support there.
Okay, so one of the focuses, there are 5 of them, as I mentioned, you brought that up already, providing support to vulnerable families with younger children. Another one is increasing child care options. That's really a big issue right now, especially when you talk about barriers into the workforce and parents being able to really support their families. Talk about, first off, what the goal there is, and then how do you go about implementing it?
Well, ideally, we'd love to ensure that there's high quality child care for those who need it or want it. But we also have family members who choose to stay home, and they're giving up an income by choosing to stay home and take care of their children. And so what we don't want to do is create an issue where we're taking tax dollars from this family to subsidize child care providers for other families. We've got to look at ways that we can cut down red tape. Sometimes we have child care providers who are having a hard time figuring out how they can build facilities because there's so much government bureaucracy and red tape. There's other things that are great options like child tax credits. So we helped to champion a child tax credit bill by Representative Pulsifer that gave a credit to all families with children, young children. So there's things like that we can do to help all families with young children. We know that those are the families that usually are the most strapped, is couples who have, or single parents who have just, young children under 6, aren't in school yet. And so those are really high focus areas for us.
Yeah, the Salt Lake Chamber recently released a report focused specifically on that and really looking into and digging into the barrier. And in a lot of cases, someone takes a look at how much child care costs versus how much they're going to make, and then they have to decide, is it even worth it to do that?
Right.
So when you talk about affordability, what are some things we can do?
Well, one of the things that we want to do, first of all, is make sure that families can choose what they think is best. So like you mentioned, if we have some people who would like to work and feel like that's best for their family, we want to make sure that there's options out there for good, high-quality childcare. If they choose to stay home, that's an option as well. Affordability, that gets tricky. I mean, right now, a lot of our childcare providers are receiving federal dollars because of COVID, and that'll run out in a year and a half. And so we're looking right now at what are the solutions to help encourage and employers is a big piece. How do we help encourage employers to look at childcare stipends for employees who need it and get involved there as well?
Youth mental health, that's something you and I have talked about for quite a while. I remember meeting you out at the county building probably about 5 or 6 years ago for an issue you were working on with your other job as a Salt Lake County councilwoman. But youth mental health, talk about the issue that we are facing. Paint it for us here in our state.
Well, we are seeing more and more kids in our state who are lonelier than ever before. We have data that shows our kids aren't getting enough sleep at night, that they are struggling with suicide ideation, self-harm, and those numbers have skyrocketed since about 2010 when social media came on the forefront. And so as the governor has looked at where he feels like what's impacting our youth the most, it's social media. And that's been a big focus of his, is to look at ways that we can reduce the amount of usage for our kids on social media, because they're trading out those in-person relationships with their friends for just being on their phone, and it's not good for them. The things they're being exposed to, the algorithms that are addictive, it's causing a lot of problems. And so one of the things I got to be involved in was the social media bills this last legislative session.
Those have been big national stories.
Yeah, it was a lot of work and a lot of fun to be able to look at what can we do to kind of rein that in, ensure parents have the ability to make decisions for their kids on how they're using social media. And then we'll be also doing a campaign to help educate the state, parents in particular, on how to better use social media with their children and what they can do to help as well. And ironically, one of the things that's affecting our kids' mental health is the amount of time their parents are on their phones using social media. So pretty hard to compete with Instagram for mom's attention or dad's attention, and that's something we hope our Utah parents will look at as well.
Foundation, helping build a foundation for young adults as they transition into a new phase of life. What are you looking at there?
So the Brookings Institution came out with the success sequence that says that if a young adult will graduate high school, engage full-time in the workforce, and get married before having children, they have a 97% chance of not being in poverty. And so looking at that, of how we can ensure our kids are getting the education that they need, the engagement in the workforce, those are things that are priorities. One of the things that we can do better is introducing kids to trades and other programs earlier in their high school year. And so we're looking at stakeholders who are involved in this. We're trying to get people together who are working in this space so that we can make some headway there.
Big focus on maybe college isn't for everyone, and you can get into those technical fields as well. Okay, we have about a minute left, but I want to hit the last one real quick, and that is family-friendly policies within the workplace. We've seen really, especially the government, evolve in this area, but what are you seeing in the private sector as well?
So one of the things that we really want to encourage our business community to do is to embrace this idea that Utah is a better place when we are the best state for families. And that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. And that means helping to focus on the needs of parents too. So parental leave is a big deal for both moms and dads. I talked about childcare stipends, flexible hybrid work schedules. We want to encourage our business community to participate with us in ensuring Utah is the best state for families.
All right, interesting stuff. We will continue to follow the progress as it goes along. Thanks so much for your insight this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now to look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The Utah Democratic Party will host its state organizing convention next month. It's set for May 20th at Southern Utah University. It's also a municipal election year. The candidate declaration period is June 1st through the 7th. The primary is Tuesday, August 15th. Make sure to connect with me on social media or through email. Let me know what's on your mind and what issues are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.